We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer, the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and I'm coming to you live from Las Vegas on this Tuesday, December 22nd, 2015. Yeah, 2005. That was a while ago. I'm sure some of you in 2005 were like still in high school or something. I don't know. Anyway, 2015. So thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. And you can listen on Spreaker.com and NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com. We promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom, as well as exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. Like all governments, it's based on power, control, and ruling over others, and achieves this through violence and force. So, before I get to my main topic, and I have a lot to talk about this week. This evening, I'm totally thrown off because somebody just sent me a message. Anytime somebody sends me a message, it just totally fucking throws me off. As I told people before, I'm very good at multitasking, except when it comes to talking on the mic. It just totally fucks me up. So what I'm kind of doing is giving people, which there's a lot of them, I guess, now out there that want to fuck me up and want to fuck my show up and stuff like that, an excuse or something they can do to fuck me up. So I got to keep my Facebook closed, I guess, during the show. But anyway, I have a couple things I want to talk about before I get to the main topic on the U.S. empire and when it will fall, or if you want to, I guess, I forgot what I called it on my event here, so I want to look at that beforehand. Oh, I should have looked at it beforehand, but pretty much it's about all empires and that they eventually fall. And when will the U.S. empire fall is essentially what we're going to talk about tonight. But before I get to that, there's a couple stories I wanted to talk about. And also, I just posted a new event for Thursday. I changed Thursday's show because our new co-host won't be able to make it. And I wanted to do a show like this for a while. And I thought since Thursday is Christmas Eve, it might be an appropriate time to do it. So what I'm going to do on Thursday is talk all about late 80s and early 90s rap and hip hop and how that affected or relates to freedom and liberty. Because I know there's going to be a lot of people that says, oh, no, it don't, because a lot of it was socialist. And that actually is true. However, I never took it that way. Not, when I was a kid, I wasn't really looking at that part of it or even thinking about that part of it. The same with, say, the Black Panthers. I didn't really look at the socialist part. I looked at the police are harassing people, and then they're coming by, they being the Black Panthers, are coming by with guns and saying, what's going on here? So it's not that I blacked it out. It's just I focused on different things. I focused on fighting against the system, but that's really what it used to be. Even though and I'm trying to text at the same time. Even though now I think a lot of rap is just kind of stupid. Not that I don't still like a lot of the beats, and there's still rappers that have been around for a while. And, they still come out with albums. Like recently, I just got the Scarface album from the library. I don't know if anybody who Scarface is. You might know Ghetto Boys. He's from the group Ghetto Boys, so a lot of people know them. So he came out with a new album that I just got. It's pretty good, and he's got to be in his 40s now, and I'll still listen to the rappers that I know from, that I liked back then, but not a lot of rappers were saying a lot in the, past few years or past, probably more than that. So I'll get some stuff. I'll definitely get rappers that I still like from years ago. But to be there really to see what went on in the late 80s, early 90s with the parental stickers and Al Gore's wife going after people and to get the sticker on there. You had in the mid 90s, you had Reverend Calvin Butts and Dolores Tucker, and they took out a steamroller and rolled over a bunch of tapes, and you had shit like that going on. So it's just some crazy stuff going on back then. 2 Live Crew getting arrested. So NWA as well for saying fuck the police. And I think the release of the movie has brought some of that back and probably brought an interest back by today's generation. I mean, don't forget that Straight Outta Compton, the album, came out in 1988. So I think I bought it in late 89 because you wouldn't hear about this stuff. Like when I was young, I wouldn't hear about NWA, or the only thing there was Yo MTV Raps. So once I knew that existed, I started watching that. But before that, it was like I didn't know what the fuck was out there. I knew Run DMC, and that was the first tape I got. So I don't want to go into the show that I'm going to do on Thursday because that's really what it's going to be about. And what I'm going to do is, because I know there's some 30-second rule or something like that. So I'm not going to play whole songs, but I'll play a bunch of clips, play like 20 seconds or 25 seconds of a song. So you can hear that as well and explain my state of mind and how it related to me and how it even helped, I think, in my journey through liberty, because it did. It was back then it was fuck you. You can't tell me what to do. You can't push your values on me. You can't make me do these stupid things. And, you could hear it in a lot of the music, even though you can look at some stuff and say, well, this is about this or that or whatever. And they talk about killing people or this or that. But a lot of it was frustration of what was going on at the time. And unless you are around at that time, I don't know that you can understand it. I mean, going back and not knowing anything about it and then listening to it, I don't know I don't know what that does. Just like I don't know that I could listen to music in the 60s or something and people that are talking about whatever that's going on that they're standing up for, that I can relate to that. If they were, I don't even know that they were, but I guess they were. But I can listen to NWA and Public Enemy and Ghetto Boys and groups like that if you take it at face value, it sounds just nuts. But I can listen to that and then see, understand what was going on there and what it really meant. So, that's what I'm going to talk about. And I have a lot to say, and I guess it will give them insight more into me as well. Not that people want an insight into me or anything, but it's just, I think it will be fun to talk about music and to play a little music on Christmas Eve, since I'm going to be on. So if you like hip hop or even are interested in hearing about what was going on at the time, which I consider myself pretty much an expert, I guess, or a semi-expert, just because I listened to all the music and I saw what was going on. Now I saw, what I saw was limited. I was a kid. I grew up at the time I was in Boston, so it might be different than other people's experiences, but I definitely know a lot about the music during that time period. So if it's something you like to hear about, I'm sure it will be interesting. Tune in Thursday, 7 p.m., Christmas Eve, till 10. And then, of course, you can always listen to the archive if you can't tune in live. But I think it will be a lot of fun. So I considered New Year's, but then I'm like, well, I don't know. I got to talk to my fiance first, and I don't know that people will be tuning in on New Year's. So Christmas Eve maybe might be something to listen to, but New Year's probably not, and she'll probably want to do something as well. So I'm leaving that open until I talk to her about doing the show. So, but even talking about it, I'm actually kind of getting excited about doing the show. I think it will be a pretty interesting show. But for tonight, we also have an interesting show. So before, there's a lot of knowledge in this that I did find it interesting. And I'm not going to go into all the details because honestly, I don't know all the details of the history of all these empires. I have enough knowledge to talk about them intelligently, but that's about it. I'm not an expert, and that's not what the show is really about. But I wanted to bring up all these other empires in comparison. It's really about, because you're obviously going to see all the differences between, okay, how is America an empire like all these were empires? And people can look at the U.S. and say, no, it's not an empire because this is what an empire is. If I talk about the Ottoman Empire or the Roman Empire, I mean, most people are familiar with, I think the biggest one's got to be the Roman Empire. I think everybody knows Julius Caesar. There was a play about him, and that's the one that I think everyone would know the most about. But the Ottoman Empire, the Persian Empire, the Mongols. I think a lot of people know because of Genghis Khan. So I'm not going to talk about every single empire there was. It'd take me all night, nor am I going to go into that much detail. But I do want to bring up some points about these different empires. A lot of them were pretty similar. There were little differences in some, supposedly. And I say supposedly because this is knowledge that gets passed down. It's hard, I think, to... I guess it depends on the empire, because if you're talking about the Ottoman Empire, you know, you're talking about, I think, maybe 400 years ago. If you're talking about, like, the Roman Empire, you're talking about way before that. So, you know, the Persian Empire, you know, you're talking BC. So... meaning before Christ. And I hate that we go by the Catholic calendar. Although if we went by, I don't know what year it would be, like how we would do that. Like start with the year of the first human or what. But they do that fucking backwards thing where, okay, year 0 is the year Jesus was born. And... you know, then every year after that is just another year. So, anyway, what I wanted to talk about first, had a cough there, is what's going on with these fucking school closings. And I saw a caption, and now I don't know that I should talk about this because this doesn't relate to it, though. In Nashua, New Hampshire, they closed the schools down due to a threat. So it doesn't relate to what happened in L.A., but then I saw something about somebody being arrested in L.A. and something about a school, but it showed one of those clips that's muted. So I don't know if that was when they closed all the schools or what. And even if it was, they'd still arrest somebody for making a prank call. So they might have arrested the person. And then they can say, well, this person had all these weapons, so they were probably going to do it even though they weren't. And to me, if you don't do something, especially something like that, where 3 days later or a week later they arrest you, I'm pretty sure they weren't going to do it then. So they want to trot people out there like, yeah, they were going to do it, and if it wasn't for our vigilance, they probably would have done it. The reason they didn't do it was because they know that we evacuated the schools or some bullshit like that. But who knows? Anyway, in New Hampshire, they pulled the same shit in Nashua, which I know the biggest town or city in New Hampshire, I believe, is Manchester. And it doesn't even have over 100,000 people, I don't think. So Nashua can't be that big. But still, I guess they closed down all the schools because they got a threat. And this fucking shit is... I don't know. It seems to be getting a little ridiculous. So it says, you know, all public schools in Nashua and New Hampshire were closed Monday after the district received a detailed threat of violence directed at its 2 high schools. So if you have something directed at its 2 high schools, you have what just happened, and I believe this was either Monday. Yeah, I just said Monday. Duh. So yesterday, but this might have been from last. I had just heard about it. I'm not sure it was from last Monday. No, it was from this Monday. Okay. So they close all these schools. Now people know that, hey, we can fuck with, you know, yes, I'm sure whoever, if they catch the person that does it, that they're going to probably give them like 5 years or something in maximum security prison, which is ridiculous. But that's what they're going to start doing. There's no doubt in my mind that if they caught the LA person, which I don't know if this is live or not, it's saying 7:14. Oh no, 7:14 a.m. So they may have caught the person in the LA prank there. But people are going to get serious time for just pranking schools. But they're also showing that, hey, there's so much technology out there now. I know the government doesn't want you to have anything where you can escape their encryption, where you can have something encrypted that they can't break into. But they are now just getting ridiculous with it. And, you know, the person that called in New Hampshire, how do you know that they didn't get the idea from the person in LA and like, look, they closed the whole fucking school district. And who knows where this person went. So sorry, I can't do that. I cannot text or write a message and fucking talk at the same time. It's just like, and I'm so good at the other shit. I'm like the best at it, man. I'm at work. I'm multitasking. I'm doing all this shit. You know, all of that. And I'm sitting here trying to talk, and like my brain is like, I don't know if that's something that most people can't do, or it's just me and I'm like part retarded. But there's like a couple things where I honestly think I'm part retarded. Well, maybe not, because I know some people that are worse than me. Spelling was one of them, of course. But the other thing was, there was one other thing. I don't remember. But that's probably it. But spelling is one of them. I can't when it comes to spelling. But anyway, so I guess this pattern starting now where now you have people calling schools. So I would think that if you wanted to prank a school, that there'd be ways to probably get away with it. I don't know. It depends how much time you spend on the phone. It depends. Are they going to set up all schools now where... Because I don't know what tracing is like now. Because I know it used to be if you had your number blocked, that it would be difficult to actually get your number, at least in the fucking movies in the 80s, where before caller ID, even after, because if you blocked your number, it would be this big thing. As long as you didn't stay on the phone long enough, they couldn't actually trace the call. Because what I understood was the phone company kind of built in like a back door for your privacy. And that was that, what, star 67 or star 82, something like that. I don't remember, but there's something where you can block your number. You can do it on your cell phone too. You just select block your number. So if I call, and that would be the worst way to call probably a cell phone. The best thing to do would be to break into somebody's house that lives nowhere near you and call them from there and disguise your voice. So that would probably be the best thing for you to do, and if you're trying to prank your school. But fuck them. I honestly, it doesn't really mean shit to me, because if they want to say, well, it takes all this manpower to get everybody to help, and not help, but like the police and this and that and all the teachers, and it just disrupts everything. To me, that would be the point. It's just like taking a parking ticket to trial, because you're trying to disrupt the stupid system, because what they're doing is stupid. I don't know. I understand, I guess calls are a little bit different, and they won't release the calls. So the fact that they won't release the calls kind of shows that, to me at least, that they're being ridiculous and how far they're going. Usually with a bomb threat, at least like 20 years ago, they clear the school. They just have the people go through it with dogs, the bomb squad. You'd wait outside for 20 minutes or a half hour, if that. And I don't know if I was ever at school when they had a bomb threat. I might have been and not even known it. There might have been like a fire alarm. I thought it was a fire alarm, and it was really a bomb threat. But they would pretty much, that's all they would do. They wouldn't go through the whole city and check every single school or every school in the area. What are you going to do? Now, the other side of this is, what are they going to do now? Well, they're probably going to go and say, well, we need metal detectors. We need this. We need that. We need TSA basically at the fucking door of the high school. And I'm not even exaggerating. This is getting fucking ridiculous. It really is. The amount of security that they want to have and the amount of privacy that they want to take away. I just, fuck it. As far as I'm concerned, if I get killed, then I get killed. I got, guns to protect myself, so I'm not worried about that. And pretty much if I'm in a building and it blows up, then it fucking blows up. I just hope it kills me. So, well, they got like robot legs now and shit too. So, but if you look at all this shit, there was something we talked about, I think on Thursday, about an article about how talking about terrorism all the time actually increases terrorism. And I believe that with other shit too, that talking about this shit all the time on TV actually increases it as well. So talking about calling schools and calling in bomb threats and calling in whatever type of threats are being called in, that it's going to increase that. And the more they make a big deal out of things, the more it's going to happen. So, I know all these people, oh, my kids, I don't want anything to happen to my kids while they're in school. Why don't you fucking take them out of school and homeschool them? Jesus. It's a no gun-free zone. It's, I guess it's fine with bombs, though. It's not bomb-free zone. Because I think that's what they're worried. Or fire. You could burn the school down while people are in it or something. That goes back to the whole point that, like, when it comes to shit like that, you can't avoid it. If somebody wants to do something, especially to that type of situation, like a building situation, they can really fuck you up with bombs and fire alone. I mean, Jesus. Because all you got to do is block. If somebody like, and this is not from thinking about it, this is from like watching movies, but I'm actually thinking about it right now. Like the whole big thing in the people who've seen Lean on Me, where they chained the doors and the fire chief, went nuts, but they wanted to just get him out of there. But yeah, if you're locked in, you can't get out. And if somebody locked the fucking doors from the outside and put chains on them or something after people were in school and lit the fucking school on fire, I mean, there's so many. It's just the point being that it goes back to, well, it's guns. It's, ban guns, whatever. It's not about the whole point is it's not even about guns to the government, man. It's about control. And it's about people not being able to defend themselves against the government. But it's also about control. So this whole thing and what shit like this does is it makes kids think, it militarizes them more, even stupid, ignorant parents. And it's just, we're living in a militarized world. Not just fucking city. Well, I don't know world. I don't know what goes on in other countries. I'm sure there's. It doesn't matter though, because they all have governments, so it's just levels of freedom. But they could have a higher level of freedom in other countries. They definitely do economically. I don't think there's any debating that economically they have a higher level of freedom in other countries. And this is from ratings books, actually, that they rate the level of freedom. So like the top 20 countries or whatnot, that it's like a freedom index, and the Heritage Foundation does one and somebody else does one. And the U.S. is not, I know they're not in the top 15. Depending on which one, they might not be in the top 20. That's on the economic side. And that, to me, is very believable. Then on the freedom side, I don't think they're in the top 10 neither. Now, it depends how you look at it. Because in a way, I would look at it as not in a way. You don't have freedom, but is there any country that really does? So where would it end up? I mean, if you base it off of what the government can do and has done and can get away with, well, the government can pretty much do whatever they want, and it's been proven that they have done what they want, and they will do what they want. They will continue to do whatever they want. So, if you're looking at it that way, I would say, I could see how it could be down the list. I'm not saying that it should be higher or not, because, well, I'm not necessarily saying it should be higher or not, period. But I'm not saying that anything where it should be. I just don't know what countries' social freedom that other countries have, because I just don't know enough about other countries. But with the police alone, it seems pretty fucking bad. And just the fact that there's no justice system. I can't see it being. I guess I can see other countries being worse, but I can see other countries being better as well. So I don't know. I don't want to get into a whole discussion on this because we've talked about this before, and this is not what the show's about. So the other article I wanted to talk about. So I guess coming to a what do you call it? A city near you. It took me like 10 minutes to think of that. School closings, the whole entire fucking city, or in the case of Las Vegas, probably the whole county would get closed for what? That's the whole thing. Again, they're not saying what they said. I want to know what they said for them to close all these schools, because they're not saying that. So anyway, it's bullshit to me. Just like they don't describe the terror plots when they say they stopped them. They're, we stopped 200,000 terror plots. You just got to trust us, even though we're a bunch of fucking liars. The other story I wanted to talk about, and I can't get my article open because it's like stuck, was here in Las Vegas. And I think it was the night I was on the Strip, although I wasn't walking around on the Strip or anything. I don't walk around on the Strip. I was just meeting somebody who happened to be staying on the Strip that day. So I went to meet them, and then, I parked in the garage and then went to go meet them. From what I understand, this was like somebody pulled into people walking down the street. No, I can't. This fucking website sucks. So just so you know, Review Journal, even though you suck anyway, because you're a biased fucking paper. And then we only have really one paper because the other paper is owned by the same people. And I don't know who owns the local news stations, but probably the same fucking people too. But anyway, and it's pretty much like that. It's not specific to Las Vegas. The news is controlled everywhere. So I don't think there's really a difference. But a 24-year-old for a 24-year-old woman, and I have to talk about this because it happened in my city, was charged with murder. And they love to do this, right? You would think, okay, murder and maybe like one other thing is enough, right? But no, they stack charges like a motherfucker. And I still can't get into this article to get more of the details because I did look over it earlier, but I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So they charged her with murder. She had a kid in the car, so of course charged her with child neglect. Charged her with leaving the scene of an accident, even though I guess right after she drove someplace else and told people. She drove to the Tuscany. And I saw the press conference from the stupid police, the Las Vegas Police Department, and the idiot. So this is what the fucking sheriff fuckhead does. Walks in and says, "Good morning." And then he whatever, might as well call him a fucking girl, comes in and says, "Oh, well, usually when someone comes in and says good morning, you say good morning." And they're like, "Good morning, Sheriff." I'd be like, "Fuck you." So you said good morning. You said good morning to like 30 people in a room. So everybody's supposed to say good morning to you, and now you're going to cry? Because what? people didn't say good morning. They're not there to say good morning to you. They're there to get the fucking news. So one person had died, and it was something like 36 people got injured. He had said, well, we're not ruling out if it's a terrorist attack. Now, everything's a fucking terrorist attack. And what the definition of a terrorist attack is now, I have no idea. It's supposed to be, I guess, if you committed an act based on your ideology. But what does that even mean anymore? So I don't know. If you're not part of a terrorist group and you go out and commit something in the name of what's the difference, I guess, between committing something, not being part of a terrorist group, but reading something and then going and committing something in the name of that? Like, can you read like a fucking, weren't there people that watched Friday the 13th and some kid blamed it on that, and people that blamed the Columbine on the Basketball Diaries because they dressed up in the long coats and shit? It's always, blaming something, I guess. I don't know. They're saying, well, we don't think it was an act of terrorism. It could have been something else. Now, why is everything now, though, you have to check out it's terrorism? So do you got to do that? Like if a guy kills his wife, is that, you sure that that's not terrorist? Maybe he converted to Islam and she wouldn't, so he had to kill her because he's following what it says about, well, this is open to interpretation, but what it says about non-Muslims, that she wouldn't convert, so he had to kill her. So they're going to investigate everything. Everything is terrorism. Everything is fucking close down the whole fucking city. Everything is put everything on lockdown, lock your doors. You can't come outside. We're going to go through and search your house. Is that it? But America's not a police state or not a Nazi country or anything like that, right? It's not an oligarchy, as an article, basically a study revealed. It was a study from one of the Ivy League schools. So, and that's just that. Never mind all the shit that the government gets away with and does to people and legally does it. And nothing happens, of course. So, I don't know how the shit that they're doing and these idiots that are believing it and giving up security or giving up freedom for security are not, I don't know. I don't know what to say about them. They're morons. Because what's going to happen is one day, obviously, it's going to affect them in some way, where I know somebody who's I'm going to have on the show is facing 20 years in jail because her son broke his leg. So that's nice. You have CPS. You can just call CPS anonymously because you don't like your neighbors, and they don't have to know who you are. They're still going to investigate it. Now, you would think if someone made a complaint that they would need to verify that. But no, why do that? Why verify a complaint about somebody? Now, if you want to not tell the person that you're investigating, okay, maybe I understand that. But I don't think CPS should exist anyway because they do a lot more damage than good. But how can you just take an anonymous call and investigate something based on that? Like, what the fuck? It's like you need to go and live in the middle of the desert with no fucking neighbors and just, I don't know, people might drive. You got to be like, you can't be too close to the freeway because then people will see a house and say, well, there's a house out there. Maybe you should go check on them because they're just out there and they could like be like Texas Chainsaw Massacre people or something. So you should check on them. It's getting fucking, shit is just getting fucking insane. And I sometimes I don't really know what to say about it anymore when I look at this, because obviously it's frustrating. And the fact that not enough people are really saying anything. And if you feel that way, then fucking say something about it. I'm not saying do something crazy, but I'm saying stand up and say something about it. But most people are not going to do that. I saw on my Facebook page compared to my other ones how the one that's called, what did I call it? It was Nonpartisan Liberty for All Presents Non-Compliance, and then something about self-defense. And it's like right away, I think most people stayed away from that. Oh, I'm not going to like that. I could get in trouble maybe. Or like I could be put on a fucking list about whatever. So it really shows when it comes down to it, you know, how many people are willing to do anything. And there's not a lot of people. And, you know, I don't know that I can really even say that much anyway, because, you know, I'm doing my show. I'm saying what I'm not even really censoring myself. I am to like a 0.0001% probably, just because I don't want to word something the wrong way and then have the task force show up at my house. And then, not that I really give a fuck, because I tell them to go fuck off because I have nothing to say to them. So I guess it really doesn't matter, but I'd rather just not deal with them. So, but that's not going to stop me. There's no fear of somebody showing up trying to question me, or somebody coming after me, or any of that, or people that are fucking talking shit about me, any of that. There's no fear there. None. Okay? If anybody wants to do something to harm me physically, I will defend myself. And if anybody wants to fucking do anything else, you know, we'll, I guess, take it one step at a time, depending on what it is. But I'm not out there to hurt anybody or bother anybody, or even push what I believe down somebody's throat. I'm not out there fucking trying to push my views on other people, although I'm just telling the truth. So if you don't want to, you know, if I'm talking in a conversation and you don't want to hear it because you want to live in your fake little fucking world, then, you know, you don't have to talk to me. If you don't want to hear it on my show, obviously there's plenty of shows out there that will tell you how things are great and how everything's fantastic and all of that shit. And you can go watch those shows. So I'm not trying to push anything down anybody's throat. The one thing that bothers me, though, is if you want to live your life that way, where the government controls your fucking life, then fine, go do that. I don't want to live my life that way. So who the fuck are you to try to force me to live my life a certain way if I'm not hurting anybody? That's my problem. I'm not telling you how to live your life. I'm saying, hey, as long as you don't hurt anybody, do whatever the fuck you want to do. I don't care. You want to be like really conservative and only wear whatever, certain clothes because you can't wear a skirt above your knee or something, and only want to watch certain types of TV, and don't want to curse and don't want to see anybody naked or something. I don't know. Whatever. That's fine. I don't really fucking care. You don't have to do that. But you don't have to force other people not to do that. If people want to live their life that way, as long as they're not hurting anybody, then leave them the fuck alone. And if somebody that you care about does one of those things, it's their right to do that. Sorry. If you didn't want that to happen, then maybe you should have been a better parent, or maybe it's just not on you. It's just that's what they wanted to do. But keep in mind that when you have kids, that they are people, and they are people that own themselves. They can go out and do what they want to do, no matter what you say. At a certain age, you can't stop them. And I think that the age is arbitrary and bullshit in a lot of ways as well. But you can't stop them, and if they hurt you because of that, that's not a reason to ban that. It's your problem, really, that you have an issue with it in the first place. Or maybe they're doing it because you did something to, contribute to it or whatever. So I'm talking about, like, if somebody's daughter's a stripper, so they think stripping should be illegal, or their daughter's a porn star, so they think porn should be illegal. Well, that's not hurting anybody. That's your feelings getting hurt because of your views, and that's too bad. So I'm going to take a break and chill out for a minute, and then we'll get to our main topic for the show. We're going to talk all about empires and how the U.S., as all empires, have fallen. And some of them have been around a lot longer than the U.S. before they have. Is how much longer until the U.S. empire falls. So we're going to talk about some of these old empires, as well as the U.S. and how it is an empire, which we did talk about the U.S. being an empire a few weeks ago, but we're going to build on that and talk about how much longer does it have, and also compare it to other empires of the past and how it's totally different, but that doesn't mean it's not an empire. So we will be right back after this. Nonpartisan, libertyforall.com. Check us out there. You can also check us out on Spreaker.com. And we'll be right back. Oh, and don't forget, on the Christmas Eve, I should call it like Dave's Christmas Eve party or whatever, where we're going to talk all about hip hop and how, with my experience, directly through my experience and my knowledge of late 80s and 90s hip hop, and how that pertained to freedom and liberty and how it even affected me. So we'll talk all about that on Thursday night, 7:00. So we'll be right back.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. I'm Ron Paul, the host.
And I'm Daniel McAdams, your co-host. Dr. Paul, I noticed you've written a new article that's just come out, and it's really very interesting. It's the green light for the American Empire, and you really trace this big push for the American Empire back to 1990.
That's right. And there are other people right now writing articles about the 25-year war, 1990. Something different happened. And I've been fascinated with that date. So I went back thinking about how important it is. Actually, I learned some things by just checking on this current history, because I have always believed that the most significant political, especially a geopolitical item in my lifetime was the downfall of the Soviet Union. And I never realized how closely connected the downfall of the Soviet Union was to the tremendous growth of the American empire. You know, we've been around and we've been building and we've been overseas for a long time, and we've had our Cold War and the competition all going on. But all of a sudden, there was an amazing amount of connections starting in 89, but really in 90, some of the events that came together. But, you know, our friend Michael Rosef has written about this, and he calls, his dates sort of coincide with what I'm talking about, in that the war that we're in started in 1990. Mm-hmm. We didn't get our peace dividend. It looks like the military-industrial complex got their dividend out of this. So we didn't usher in a great time for peace. And he called it the Great War II. Yeah. And he called the Great War I was, you know, Woodrow Wilson's World War I, the Great War for making the world safe for democracy. So he dated from 1914, and he called it the end of that in 1990. And now we're in that second war of making the world. And of course, he's not very optimistic about it either. And then somebody else has a page out that does it constantly. They call it the Long War. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's a pretty good name, too. But I came up with the name. It's never easy to come up with the perfect name. But I guess a little wishful thinking on my part, I want to call it the Last War. Mm. Hopefully, this is the last war that we're going to have, where it's designed to just grow an empire and then see the destruction of the empire and have constant Cold Wars and whatnot. So I want it to be the last war, but only time will tell on this. But just very briefly, some of the dates that I came across that I'm sure you're very familiar with, but to me it was amazing how they came together. And you know, 89, we remember the Berlin Wall going down, but I forgot that just a couple months before that, guess what? The Soviets had to wimp out of Afghanistan, surrender, and walk out. So the Soviet system collapsed. They lose in Afghanistan, and the Berlin Wall comes down. And then the other thing is, in the early part of 1990, the Central Committee for the Communist Party had a meeting. And I don't remember reading about this, but that meeting, they conceded and gave up all their political power, which led to a short period of time to 15 of their republics just dissipating and disappearing. So I don't know. I guess you've thought a little bit about, say, April Glaspie. You recall a little bit of that story, I'm sure.
It's true, and what I noticed from your article, I remember 1990, I think I was just going into grad school, and all of these things were happening, and they seemed at the time bewildering. The world was changing so rapidly, and these things seemed to be sort of disparate things that were happening separately. And I think one of the things you did in the essay is you drew them together into sort of a common theme, and you tied it all together to the U.S. response to the changing world was really boiled down to the meeting between April Glaspie and Saddam Hussein back in July of 1990.
And you know, there was a little controversy. It remains controversial now whether she really gave the green light. But one thing for sure that you can be certain of is that Saddam Hussein was our ally. We allied with him through all the 80s, helping him fight the Iranians. And after that meeting, and there's documentation of pretty strong words of saying we don't even deal with Arab-to-Arab border disputes. And she met with him in July 25th of 1990. And 1 week later, he invaded. So in his mind, I don't think anybody could argue that he didn't get a green light. So, but then the big thing would be if you're going to try to satisfy all the conspiracies and all, did our government just blunder, or did our government sort of say, hey, neocons like events that they can respond to, and they certainly got the event that they needed, because then quickly thereafter we essentially declared war, although we didn't go into Kuwait until January of the next year.
And we had a new purpose.
Yeah,
it was interesting when we were preparing for this. I went back and looked over the transcript, and what I was astonished by, looking at it again, is how friendly the language was between Glaspie and Hussein. We have great friendship, great respect for your country. We know that we'd like to have you have economic success. You could easily see, if the transcript is accurate, how if you're Saddam Hussein, you're feeling pretty good now that they understand.
I don't want to go over the whole article. Maybe nobody will want to read my article, but I do want to mention one other date that sort of fascinated me, because it was July and August when the green light occurred, and the world events were changing, and the Soviets were collapsing. But also, interestingly enough, on 9/11. 9/11, 1990,
wow.
Which has to be a coincidence, it can't be related. But 9/11/90 is when George Bush gave a speech to both houses of the Congress, and a speech was entitled "Toward a New World Order." And I remember that very clearly, and my comment was, because the conspiracy people who were just ridiculed for talking about that, maybe there's going to be a new world order come one of these days, and who knows what would happen. This was the first time I ever remembered somebody in a powerful position said, that is what our goal. And unfortunately, the New World Order is what I saw and see now as being something I consider pretty negative.
Nonpartisan liberty for all. See, you'll be hearing, I guess, things like that, although I wouldn't probably play that song on the show on Thursday, but it's not really a song that I don't know. Anyway, that was from that's actually Eric B. and Rakim from the Juice soundtrack, but I just take out the vocal parts and play parts of instrumentals briefly, so then I can upload to YouTube if I want to. I want to set this up. Somehow I set this up where it was uploading to YouTube, and then it was uploading to another account that I made, and I didn't even know how it got linked to that fucking account, and it uploaded like 4 shows, and that was it. So I got to go back in and try to upload to my YouTube account. But what it did was it split the shows into like fucking 15. And I'm like, who's gonna, it was like 15 minutes per, whatever clip. And I don't know why it did that. So maybe I can do something where maybe that's part of the setup. I don't know. But we do have on Skype, hopefully my Skype won't fuck up, because we had a problem last time we were on Skype, but Thomas Woody of North Missouri Cop Block, who's been away for a while, not in jail, but has had, as I mentioned before, has had some personal issues, is with us. So, Thomas, can you hear me? Oh, I have to call you first. Well, let me do that. I think I did that last time when I had Ken on last week. Who I actually got to see during the weekend. Thomas, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, there's like fucking static, man. I don't know what what causes this this shitty fucking static, and I don't know if it comes through even, but like I can hear it. It might be just through the headphones. I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, so I don't know if you want to talk about. You've kind of been gone for a while. I don't know what you want to say to the audience about that, but say whatever you want.
Well, I was reading through, the laws that we're supposed to be adhering to in this country, from this de facto government that we have. But we have a right to travel in this country, and the Supreme Court back in the 1800s has held unanimously, time and time again, that an individual's right to travel is an inherent right that is so basic that it doesn't even have to be mentioned. But what do we see today? We see the Department of Motor Vehicles constantly telling everybody that it's required by law. You have to have your vehicles registered. You have to have a driver's license. They're compelling you, forcing you to conduct commercial enterprise. You're being forced to conduct commerce on the streets. Anytime you just want to drive to Walmart and get a gallon of milk or whatever you want to do, you have to conduct commerce while doing so because you have to pay the government. Even though these streets are public property. This is what we built these streets for. We built these streets so we could travel on them. We didn't build the streets for people to conduct commerce on. That's why people who conduct commerce on them pay a tax for it. So I've been refusing to license and register my vehicle. And let's just say I've been getting a lot of pushback from the local police department. I've been arrested once. My wife's been arrested twice. And that's the main thing. They're going after my family because they know they can't get to me. So what they've been doing is they're trying to get to me at through my family by harassing my wife. They've brought like 5 different cases up against my wife where they've only got 1 case against me.
Of the same thing, of not registering your car?
Yep.
How many times can they keep giving it to you?
Well, apparently they can give it to me every single time they see me out on the streets. That's what they're claiming. But
what if you're on the way to get your car registered?
Well, there's another charge, I suppose. But I told them, I said, if you guys are going to continue to pull me over for this, then I guess we're going to be hanging out quite a bit because I have a right to do this, and I'm going to continue to exercise this right, and you're all just going to have to get over it.
Well, the DMVs are all connected, unfortunately, so that's not one of those things where you can just move to another state and it will go away, but they'll have to.
Yeah, they got a federal compact where it's a national driver's database, what it is. So if you have a driver's license, which is actually, if you look in the law, there is no driver's license, so that card that you have is really nothing at all. There is a commercial's driver's license, but or a commercial operator's license, not a driver's license. So in the law, it's an operator's license. Now, the DMVs are all, like you said, are all connected at the federal level. And so when you have a driver's license, your number, your name, your address, and everything that's associated on that card is put into a federal database. And that's how they can figure out who you are anywhere in the United States.
Right. Well, people have, also they have that driver's license ID. Some people actually have Social Security numbers. It depends on the state. They try to get you to use your Social Security number. In some states, I think they may even be able to force you to do it.
Yeah, and think about the implications on that. If you have to use your Social Security number on there, when they send that over to the dispatch to get your information back, that's all open airway. Anybody can listen to that.
Well, it's just easy to connect the...
They're going to give your address, your name, your Social Security number, everything over an open line that anybody can listen to, and then you wonder why identity theft is rampant in this country.
Well, what I was going to say is then it's easier to connect to other information in a database. But I do have a lot of information to cover in the next little under 2 hours here. But of course, that's, I know some people would just say, well, just register the car. But, you're obviously taking a stand and you're not complying. So that's what everybody should be doing, is not complying with this bullshit. And I actually have to register my car in I think it's by January, the first week of January. So we'll see.
That
We'll
problem
see
is
what
that
happens there.
If you adopt a policy of just do it, it's not that big of a deal. Where does it stop? Where does the infringements on our rights stop? They start taking the little things that we forget about away from us, and then they start claiming that the rights that we used to have are now privileges, and then they teach it in school that it's all privileges, that the government gives this to you, that it's not inherent, that you don't have it just simply because you're a human being. And then eventually they have their de facto dictatorship that they are trying to work towards in this totalitarian system that we have today.
Right. No, definitely. So, speaking of, I guess, totalitarian systems, so I'm far from an expert on empires, and I will say I probably know more about the Empire in Star Wars than any other empire here. Although I don't know what they were called. They didn't have a name.
It was the Empire.
The Empire, right?
It was the Empire and the Rebels.
I was thinking the Jedi, but
the Jedi were actually part of the Empire, but I'm seeing that the Empire was turning evil. So they
moved
away and became the Rebels.
Right, but they were fighting against the Empire, but
and they were considered the bad guys.
So I know Star Wars is a good, actually, it's a good analogy to what's going on. You could look at certain parts of basically a false flag, and then the Emperor said, "Oh, now I have to take over the government," and there it was the whole galaxy as opposed to just one country, but basically
because of national security.
That's what it was in the part 3, but it was the last one that they had made, and that's where it was when the original Star Wars was made, which was really part 4, but we don't need to get into Star Wars. But anyway, so obviously all empires have fell, but when I thought about it, really the one empire that has never really fallen is England, is the British, because the British, although they lost a lot of their territory, they're not really an empire anymore. They're more of a country. They still have control over part of Ireland and Scotland.
Yeah, the
Crown
doesn't have a lot of authority, but they still got a lot of respect in the government, and they still have a lot of pull.
You also have the fact that I'm not talking about the Crown. I'm talking just about the country. I mean, it's still the country still exists. It just transformed from a king to a democracy. But
if you want to get real technical, we are still. I shouldn't say we because I know how you don't like that, but the United States government is still technically part of the English Empire.
And how you figure? I know that Canada and all these other countries are, but I
can speak on behalf of what it says here in the Missouri Constitution specifically. In the Missouri Constitution, it specifically says that the common law of England and all laws that was passed prior to I can't remember which king it was exactly, is in full effect. So we are still governed in Missouri.
That doesn't mean it's governed by England. It's saying the laws prior to, talking about English common law, because they based it off of English common law. But that doesn't mean that they have any. Then
it says further. It further says that
power.
Any laws that they pass over there, if it's not repugnant to any laws that we have here, we have to adhere to them.
Well, it doesn't say anything about that in the U.S. Constitution. So
No, not specifically. No. But
So
does-
if
I'm
it says
saying
that in the
it's-
Missouri Constitution, then I don't know about Missouri, but Missouri's Constitution is superseded by the U.S. Constitution. So, but they do have involvement. It's weird because I don't know how much involvement they actually have. But if you look on a Canadian coin, as I had bought some gold and silver Canadian maple leaves, on the other side is Queen Elizabeth. And they still technically have some sort of something connection. Not the United States doesn't, but Canada, Australia, I think maybe even South Africa. But I don't want to get into that. I don't know enough about it to discuss it. I do know that for whatever reason, they still have Queen Elizabeth on their coins, which makes no fucking sense to me. So there's still some connection there when it comes to these countries. And these were countries that were colonies. Basically, I think Britain was one of the first, along with some other countries in Europe. They were more of a colonial empire where they had colonies and they had them all over the world. So I'll get back to them later. But if I was
like
to
US.
say that there is a country that had an empire, although they don't really have one now. Well, I guess it depends how you look at it because they're with the United States on a lot of stuff. So I don't know enough about England to say how much involvement they have in what all this stuff that the United States does. And they could have just as much involvement. So they could still be, for all intents and purposes, an empire as well. But not like the U.S. I mean, but we'll get to that. So in general, 99% of empires fell. And back then, you really didn't have borders per se. So that was the difference when Britain started its empire. It, like I said, it was more a colonial empire because you had more countries. Now, I don't know if not being technically a country and, first of all, what would define a country, but that it gave people more incentive to just go over and take over land. And in a way, you can say that, was it freer back then in a sense? Although the way they had the approach to it wasn't, because they had basically, for the most part, just rulers that ruled these empires. But in the sense that the land was just kind of open. Everybody was nomadic. And basically, so, and how they didn't discover the United States, they didn't know it existed till way later, because none of these countries in Europe and Asia were developing empires in the U.S. until whenever Columbus first went over there, and then the first settlement was Jamestown in 16 something. So in Europe, though, you had a few different empires that people know of. I'm not an expert, and I don't claim to be. I have a little knowledge on some of them, but most of them had a lot of things in common. So one, you had the Roman Empire. That lasted 600 years. And the Roman Empire was basically most of Europe. It was kind of in like a circle. But at one point, it went from England all the way to Baghdad. So it went pretty far over. And, well, I think it was kind of in a circle because there was water in between that. But the difference with the Roman Empire that didn't apply to any other countries except the Greeks later, was that for 500 years they actually had a democracy and a Senate and you could vote. Now, I don't think that makes a fucking difference neither, but they didn't have an emperor till Caesar took over, and that was they were already 500 years into their empire.
Yeah, but they still had their city-states and everything.
And yeah, but I mean, they went from having, a democracy to having an emperor, to having one main ruler. So I don't know how much, again, it changed, and they had a emperor for 100 years, and then they were, I believe, the Byzantine Empire took them over. So that's the only difference about them. You had the Ottoman Empire, which was the last Muslim empire, which peaked between the 15th and 16th century. They went at its peak, I guess, from North Africa to Egypt to the Arabian Peninsula. Its holdings included Levant, Mesopotamia, the Cassius, the Crimea. I don't know if that's the same Crimea where Russia annexed Crimea from the Ukraine, and the Balkans, and all the way to the gates of Vienna, Austria. That was the largest empire of its time. There were some differences with the Ottoman Empire too, that they actually used coinage, but this is in the 15th to 16th century. They moved to a city-type life. They allowed other religions to live in the territory, and they had some science and culture. But, of course, it depends who you talk to.
And Muhammad was born.
It depends who you talk to. And he had already died when the Ottoman Empire was formed. And basically what happened, I think, with the Ottoman Empire, there's, of course, interpretations, but the Battle of Vienna, I guess, really damaged the empire in 1683, and inflation from the coinage. And I don't know what ended up happening with the Ottoman Empire. It kind of just fell apart, and I don't know what happened with the land. And again, these are all, it was different in that, and this is where it's debatable, is this better? And I, of course, think it is in a way where you don't have borders. Of course, they still had borders. They had, this is our empire, but it was just one big empire, as opposed to countries and those type of things. But I don't know if the fact that there are countries that deters people more, or other countries more, from attacking them because they're supposedly a country as opposed to some empire. And that's basically what the caliphate was, a Muslim empire, I believe. And that's like what they're trying to supposedly do now. I just think what they're doing is they're a proxy army for the United States. And we talked a lot about the Muslims in a whole bunch of different ways. I believe it was either last week or the week before, where I just talked about Islam and just tried to be fair about it. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and then also talked about some of the recent terror attacks, or supposed terror attacks, whatever you want to call them, and some of those type of things. The Byzantine Empire was the one that came from the Roman Empire. They were Christians. They spoke Greek. I think they were the other ones who actually... Oh, no, that was a Macedonian Empire that had democracy. And I don't know if another empire just came and took them over as well. Then you have the Persian.
Didn't the Romans have a republic? They didn't have a democracy. They had a republic.
Right, but it was it's
It was a
really
democratic voting system, but it was a republic government.
yeah. It's to me, it's all the same shit. They call it a republic, but so does the People's Republic of China, who's a communist country. So
Yeah, well, they're actually getting ready to pass laws that makes it illegal for the media to talk about terrorist attacks.
right, but they call themselves the Republic of China. So does Korea. So just because someone says they're a republic, I don't think a republic really means shit anymore.
Just because they said they're public servants don't mean they're going to look out for them.
I don't think, people say that about the United States. Well, we're a republic. Well, what does that really mean? Because it doesn't seem to mean shit. So the Persian Empire, and this was a long, long time ago. This is BC. They had first Cyrus the Great was one of the first, I think, emperors. He wanted to conquer the whole world. It was maybe the largest empire ever. And one of the things that I guess he did, supposedly, is he didn't enslave his new subjects, whereas other people did. He considered himself a liberator, like liberating that people from whoever's empire they were under, and he freed the Jews, supposedly. And I say supposedly because history is very open to interpretation, and when you're talking about 500 something BC, I mean, I don't know. And next was King Darius, who built Persian City. I mean, the things they built that are in Iran and are still there, I guess, are these beautiful. I guess one of the things with the Persian Empire was this beautiful architecture.
Well, hasn't ISIS destroyed a lot of that stuff, though?
No, because this is Iran.
Yeah, that's right.
Not the stuff in Iran. But they were conquered by Alexander the Great, who was from the Macedonian Empire. And they had spoke Greek. They were the ones who, before that, I believe, had a democracy. And then you have, of course, the Mongol Empire. These are not every single empire. If I had to talk about every empire, we'd be here all night. I would just wanted to name a few and the differences in some of them. Everybody knows about Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan. I heard
Hitler.
I heard a thing regarding Genghis Khan that he would drink. How do I say this? When women get excited, he would have a bunch of women get it
Ejaculate?
into a bowl or something and would drink it. And then after him, you had his son Kublai Khan. And they were, there were some, like the Romans and the Macedonians I think maybe even the Byzantine Empire, but that would refer to other areas as they were like mongrels, or they were, like these they had a word for them. So like mutants, that wasn't the word, but those were the guys that, I mean, Genghis Khan was, the barbarians. So Genghis Khan, I mean, that would classify a barbarian group. I think most of the, the Romans, the Persians, probably even the Ottoman Empire, and the Macedonians were not barbaric as other empires throughout the years. And of course you had Egypt and Greece, and those weren't really I don't consider them empires though, because they didn't really go around taking over territory. They just had where they lived, and that was kind of it. So I looked at empires as these rulers that went around and actually took over land that they were not occupying at the time. So instead of sitting there and saying, okay, we occupy what it is now known as Iran and Iraq, that's not enough. We need to keep going through city to city, keep moving forward and taking over all of this stuff. And that's essentially what we'll get to this, but this is what the U.S. did, but nobody said anything about it. But we'll get to that in a little while. So then we come to the British Empire, which we talked a little about, which was really the first colonial empire. France did the same thing. Spain did it to, probably just as much. I mean, that's why you have all the countries in South America speaking Spanish and Mexico, and because they were settled by Spain. They, I don't think, held on to countries that long. Of course, the British did. They had a lot of countries that they had colonized, basically taken over, but they did it in a way where we're going to colonize you as opposed to build an empire.
Dave, do you know off the top of your head if any of them, like any of the empires, were specifically non-secular? Because I don't know that off the top of my head.
Yeah, the Romans were not. I do know that.
Some of the city, they weren't as an overall.
The Romans were not religious at all, as far as I know.
Well,
that came later.
The Theonites, what they're called.
The Ottoman Empire were Muslims. The Byzantine Empire were Christians. The Persian Empire were Muslims. The Mongols were something else. And I don't know about the Macedonian Empire, but yeah, the Roman Empire were secular. They were not religious.
Yeah, they had the freedom of religion. That's where we get our idea for the freedom of religion.
And there's a lot of stuff that actually started with the Roman Empire that is still practiced today, like democracy and things like that. I think you had the ancient Greeks and you had the ancient Egypt, and some things came from there. But as far as these empires, and again, I'm far from an expert, but I do from the research I did, which, I could only do so much. That was one thing that did stand out, and I do know that the Byzantine Empire were Christians because that was a big thing. They spoke Greek. They're the ones that took over Rome. So I think what had happened was the reason that Rome became Christian, they actually became Christian compared to Protestant or whatever.
I remember hearing about that.
So I always get confused with fucking Christians and Protestants and the ones that follow the Pope. And I know the Christians follow the Pope, but yeah, that's probably what happened. That when they took them over, they were Christian and they tried to spread Christianity.
But the Jews are not Christians. That's where people get mixed up a lot, though. They think Jews are Christians.
but Jesus was a Jew, and so were all the disciples. Yep. So it makes no sense. And I guess the Jews were, and I did know this, that the Jews were slaves a long time ago. And you know what? The Persian Empire could not have been
They were slaves to the
Muslims. They were not Muslims because Muslims did not become a religion until after Christianity. So we're talking about 554 BC. So the Persian Empire, I don't believe they were religious or they were some kind of whatever religion, but no, they couldn't have been religious neither because they do call them, I believe they call them a Muslim, unless there was some, I'm not an expert on Islam, but I do know that Muhammad had lived after Jesus because the Quran is, a lot of it's based on the Bible. So maybe that's the difference in people that call themselves Persian. I always thought it was because you don't want to say Iran, but that Persians were not, and we can look this up, but were not Muslims because they the religion didn't exist. And at that time, Christianity didn't exist neither, because, again, this is 554 BC, when Cyrus the Great came into power, and King Darius, who came after him, was 518 BC.
It says here that the Persians were Zoroastrianism, which is a pre-Islamic religion. So it was the religion that was predominant before Islam came through.
So, yeah, because, I just remembered that Muhammad comes way after this. He comes after Christ. So the Persian Empire was not. The Ottoman Empire was, because the Ottoman Empire was, 400 years ago. So I think the Ottoman Empire started with Muhammad, and then he had died, and he wasn't the emperor, but I think when it technically started, he had like 10 followers, and I think it was, but I'm not sure, because the year the Battle of Vienna is 1683, so that might not be true neither. But that was the last Muslim empire. But yeah, the Persian Empire was not Muslims, and Christianity wasn't around yet neither, but they had freed the Jews, and that was a point. But what I was listening to on the Persian Empire was from the perspective of someone who was part of Islam. However, again, they weren't really Islamic or Muslims anyway, even though, like you said, they were kind of but basically, I mean, you might as well call them part Jews. I mean, what's the what's really the difference there in what they believed?
Jews are what is Judaism is what it is.
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm saying is there probably wasn't much difference at the time. They might have believed in a bunch of different gods, or I'm sorry.
Wasn't Moses a Jew also, according to the Bible?
Yeah, Moses was the Jewish.
Yeah, he was the
prophet,
Jew that
I believe.
Yeah, that they snuck out of the city, and then he comes back to liberate the people. And that's the whole story of how the Christians liberated the Jews.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with that. Just the Persians. I didn't study a lot in ancient history, but I guess the Persians freed the Jews, Cyrus. So when we talked about the British and the colonial empire, and like I said, you could say the same about the French. They colonized a bunch of countries. Basically, any French-speaking country like Haiti or some South African countries, they colonized. Canada, part of it. They had part of the United States. The Louisiana Purchase was from France. So they had colonized or occupied some places as well. So I think those were the three main countries that have done that. I'm sure, there's other countries in Europe that may have had a country somewhere, but it was really, I think Britain was number one, then France, then Spain. And those were the three main countries that had a colonial empire. And then you have the military empires. So, which barely, they count, but they almost don't, because they didn't exist that long. And especially Germany. So you have Germany existed as far as from when they first attacked somebody for less than 10 years. Now, Japan was getting involved in stuff in the early 1900s, and they were fighting with Russia. And I seen this whole documentary, or listened to it, what I could at least, on, I think it was from BBC, that talked about the Japan Empire. And, of course, most of it was built during World War II. And it was all taken away after. And, of course, after the bombs were dropped and Japan gave up, they gave up all that territory, like the Philippines. They had taken over Hong Kong, a bunch of land in the Pacific had been taken over by Japan.
Would the Nazis be considered part of the Christian empire since Hitler was a Christian?
See, someone had brought that up on something I was listening to, that, well, would you consider Germany, because they were talking about an argument about the Muslims. Well, wouldn't you consider... I would say no, because that wasn't their main goal. Like, it wasn't... It wasn't their... what they were...
I know Hitler spoke a lot about the Pope, and he wouldn't.
He did, but it wasn't like... I don't believe that what they were doing was carrying out what the Bible said.
We were carrying out the conquest, the Crusades.
Yeah, I don't believe that. That was way before that.
Well, he was ultimately trying to reunite Austria and Germany.
I don't believe that he was trying to... what he was doing, he was basing upon the Bible. Like when someone bases something on Islam and said, I'm doing this attack based on Islam. And he wasn't, as far as I know, he wasn't trying to convert anybody. Right. I know he was. That is true that he was a Christian or Catholic or a Christian or...
Yeah, Catholics are still Christian. They still believe...
That's the same thing, right? Christians are Catholics, right?
No, Catholics are Christians. What it is you...
Christian is the whole thing, right?
Christianity is the whole thing. Christians see Jesus as the Messiah, whereas Jews...
No, I know what they mean. I just forgot if Christian was a synonym for Catholic or Christian was covered the whole thing, because... I'm not a big religious... I'm not religious at all, of course, but I mean, it's good to know, just to have that knowledge. Like, I would read the Bible as a... well, I would probably read it as fiction, but to see what people had thought, but... and it goes into history, obviously, because... a lot of people's actions were based upon the Bible, but no, I wouldn't say what he did is the same thing as what like a terrorist does that blames it on Islam.
Yeah,
just like
goal was to reunite Austria.
Just like if somebody goes and robs a bank and they happen to be Islam, I wouldn't say, well, they did it because they're a Muslim. I would say they did it because they wanted to rob a fucking bank. They wanted money, and being a Muslim has nothing to do with it. If
a lot of people acting in the name of religion gives religions a bad name, whereas overall it might not be that bad. But,
well, I would say, that's true. But I would say, like, the people that kill abortion doctors, I would probably say that is based on religion. Because they're saying that God is saying that, this is wrong or something like that. But it doesn't necessarily have to be based on religion either. It can be that you just believe they're killing babies, so you want to save babies. But I guess it depends. So, first, the criticisms with the ancient empires, before we get into the U.S., and this is really emphasized, and they're almost looked at, that these empires, the way they talk about them in documentaries and things, is in a positive light almost. Not that they say it's positive, but it's like these were warriors. These were, and it's like, no, they were nuts. So, I mean, first of all of them had emperors at some point, except, even Greece at some point. So even though Rome and Greece did have democracies at some point, they later had emperors. So they had the equivalent of, a dictator or whatever you want to call them, But that's why they were called empires. They were ruled by emperors, or vice versa. You know, they called them emperors because they ruled over empires. So they had one person, and then when that person died, they usually handed it over to somebody else, like a relative, or they named their successor. So that, of course, is a big issue. Many of them, I mean, you'd have to say all of them were pretty ruthless, because if you're attacking another area, you're killing people. So you're just straight up murdering people for the most part to acquire property is really what you're doing, because that's what they're getting out of it. What they're getting out of it is the property. And, it all depends. Is there a settlement there? Do they, I guess if the people say, fine, you can have it, and they surrender, then they don't kill them.
They acquiesced, man.
Well, a lot of them would make the people slaves. There was a lot of slavery back then, where if the country was taken over, if there was a battle and whoever survived, they would be slaves. That had happened depending on the empire. And you'd have, nutcases like Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan, which I think was his son.
It wasn't too long ago that there used to be tribes in Africa that still did that, and the American Indians did the same thing.
Okay. Well,
just saying, it's not too far back in history that has actually happened, though, where they have went in and conquered and made the people who surrendered slaves.
Yeah, well, I mean, slavery still goes on now, so.
Yeah, it's still legal in the United States.
Well, I don't know.
Yes, if you look at the 13th Amendment, it says except for punishment of crime.
Well, you are kind of I was going to do a show on this. I mean, you basically are a slave of corporations and the U.S. government, but that's
for another that's a whole show itself.
It's not the same type of slavery. You're in a bigger,
it's corporate slavery.
You're in a bigger cage, and you have it. Yeah, that's a whole separate thing. But I mean, I would say that these armies had to be ruthless killers for the most part, and they murdered hundreds of thousands of people. All of them. I mean, to get especially the bigger empires that overtook all this land. Now, again, I don't know how populated it was, because there could have been land that they took over that there was nobody there, or there was a small settlement and they just gave up right away. But they are talked about in these documentaries like, oh, these were warriors, and they it sounds like they admired them to a certain extent for what they did. Now, I guess you could say there were good things about them as well, but how the world got into this whole empire thing and why they felt that they needed to take as much as possible, I don't get, because that was the common theme, that it's, I'm going to keep going. And they all did until they couldn't maintain it anymore, or something happened, or they fucked up, because all empires eventually fall. And we'll get to that with the U.S.
It was socially acceptable, though, to conquer over somebody because it showed you as strong. You were capable of protecting others that were, followed you. And it was you were actually lower on the totem pole in society if you worked for what you had.
Well, it's essentially you had empires, and they were proud of them. And you should hear the Japanese documentary I heard, that they were proud when Japan went and took over cities in China and things like that. So they were proud, and they were out in the open with it. Now, the U.S. government has created an empire, and people don't even know it. So where I want to start with the U.S., and I have a lot of things to say regarding the United States, and it will probably jump around a little. And there's stuff that I don't even have in here. Like, I was just playing it. Ron Paul said something about 9/11, like another 9/11. There's also another 9/11 in 1973 where 30,000 people were killed, I believe in Indonesia, when the United States installed a president there. Either that or they killed the president there. I was talking about that on another show. I'm sorry?
I said it wouldn't be the first time that,
Yeah, this was 9/11, 1973, and 30,000 people. They killed 30,000 people. And I'm thinking Indonesia. It could have been someplace else. There's so much information that I'm getting and I'm just piling in my head that it's hard to recall all the specifics. But what I do know for a fact is it was the U.S. government. They installed somebody. They killed 30,000 people. I think it was 30,000, including the president, and they installed somebody, and it was September 11th, 1973. And you can look at, since I had brought that up, and I don't want to jump ahead, but one of the reasons that the United States is an empire is look at all the invasions, bombings, and covert actions. And I listed some of them, but I saw a video where they just flashed the name of every country that the U.S. had somehow had some involvement, whether they installed a leader or attacked them or something. And there's just tons. And, we know about the recent ones, Iraq and Libya, and what they're trying to do in Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan. They've done, where they've gone in and, dropped bombs on people's houses. Of course, Japan during World War II, Vietnam. Those are just a small percentage of some of the countries that they've done the worst damage to. I think the real numbers in Iraq, and this counts Americans, was 141,000 people died in Iraq. And they lied. They gave all these false numbers about Iraq. And what happened was Chelsea Manning released those documents about how many civilians died and how many people died in Iraq. And that's how they got out there. And then they got printed on WikiLeaks. But the document I read, and I forgot where I got it from, but it was 141,000 total that had died. And the least amount were Americans, because I think it was only like 5,000 Americans or something. And I don't know if that counted like contractors, because I know they had, Blackwater, and I should probably read that book. There's so many books that I got to read. It's crazy. There's just not enough time. Really doing this is a full-time job. It's a full-time job with a staff. If I had a full-time job with a staff, I think I could really make a real fucking difference. And
this isn't easy.
Then we could move you over here, and I could pay you to work for me.
Right. Or I could go to the motor company.
Well, you could do that right now, but
that'd be my side job, right?
Well, no, I would have you work full time, and because there's nobody. Yes, there's the shows out there that people do. I know there's, I totally trashed LRN like a couple weeks ago and Ian. And because most of the shows there, they don't care. Some of them they do. And I'm friendly with a couple people on some shows out there. So I don't want to take credit away from them. But I actually really care about what I'm doing. And I want to improve. And I want to do something with this. And I want it to be a whole network type thing where I have my network, and then we also have a YouTube network and the website with a whole bunch of articles. And there's ways to make money by advertising through, Google AdWords and stuff like that on your website and all of this other stuff as well.
Quick
So
fact out there. One of the reasons that I'm so adamant about doing what I'm doing now is when I tried to go to the courthouse and try to record, my proceedings, and I told the guys, like, look, I'm not going to record anybody talking to their lawyer. I'm not going to record any conversations between anybody else and the judge. I just want to record mine, so I have a record and everything. And he's like, well, we're not going to put anything on the record today, and you don't have a right to record judicial proceedings in the state of Missouri. And I was like, that's got to be bullshit, because, the freedom of the press, right? I'm supposed to be able to record anywhere in public, and this is a public building, so I should be able to record here. So I went and I was looking on the Missouri Supreme Court website, and the Missouri Supreme Court has held that it is not a constitutional right to record judicial proceedings in the state of Missouri.
It's not in, I think, anywhere. It's up to them. And most places don't want you to have a copy, even though they film it anyway. The courts
are going to fuck you over.
The courts are very corrupt. Even the structure, it's not just how they operate them. The courts were fucked up from when they created them, but I don't want to get into the whole thing about the courts. So moving on, there was a study. Speaking of the United States wanting to go after people and wanting to create their empire. And their empire may be, they have a different type of empire. One, it's more of a secretive empire, and it's about control. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that they're officially, it's a territory of the United States. They can control you in other ways, and as long as they can get what they want, and have all the countries do what they want, then that's all they need, and that is an empire. And we can go through the reasons why. But there is a study every year since 1990, and I guess until 2003, that every year they said Iran was 5 years away from making a nuclear weapon. Since 1990, every year they said the same thing. Iran's 5 years away from making a nuclear weapon. It's because they're not. It's a bunch of bullshit. They were trying to
gone in like 2001 or something like that.
I'm sorry?
I said, didn't Al Gore come out and say the ice caps were going to melt in like the year 2000 something?
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with an empire. But yeah, that's
the American empire.
In the true number that I had found out of people, I think this is Vietnamese killed in Vietnam. I'm assuming it counts the soldiers as well. They said it was like some bullshit number, and it had come out that it was 3 million. It killed 3 million people in Vietnam, 3 million Vietnamese. They also dropped 5 bombs on them, supposedly Hiroshima-type bombs on Vietnam. And the U.S. government have killed 4 million people as of 2012. That number even sounds low. And if you count the people that were killed by soldiers trained by the U.S., or by leaders that they installed, it's 5 million. Because there's 1 million that were killed by soldiers trained by the U.S. and that were killed by installing the leaders, whatever. So 70% of the countries, or 70% of countries or territories have arrangements or bases with the U.S. Now, in comparison to me, that's a big thing right there. It's a big thing that if the United States has 70% of the, I don't know if 70% of the world, I guess that would be the same thing. Also, the numbers that I've gotten as far as military installations around the world is 1,000. Now, I had heard 200 somewhere, but I had checked a bunch of other sources, which are reliable sources, and it was 1,000 bases around the world. So, essentially, out of those bases, if you have 1,000 bases in the world, and from what I understand, the next lowest. Now, I didn't hear each country how many they have, if they have any, but I know that Russia has 10. And those are all in the former Soviet Union. And China has none. So, and that was I was watching a documentary on from a reliable channel like the History Channel or BBC or something like that. But So I'm assuming that means that no other country has any bases in any other countries or installations or whatever. You know, what the United States calls bases might be different compared to what they're calling bases. So they're saying, you know, installations, bases, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if based on that 1,000 that the U.S. government is saying, well, we only have 200, official bases, because what is a military base? And then they have, all these little installations here and there and things like that, which I'm sure they do. And that number, again, came from a few different, because I had always heard like 2 something, and I thought that was a lot. And then I had heard on a documentary like more close to 1,000. So I'm like, well, let me look that up. And then I looked at a couple websites and they were saying the same thing. So again, from what I understand, there are 1,000, yes, 1,000 military bases and or installations or whatever you want to call them that the U.S. has around the world. And to me, that's unbelievable. And that's where the 70% of countries or territories have arrangements or bases with the U.S. So how is that not a fucking empire alone? How can you not take that number right there, even by itself, and say, okay, if you have that many bases, first of all, why would you need that many bases? It's because the United States wants to control the entire fucking world. They want to be able to get whatever they want. So if Russia has 10 bases outside of Russia, and again, all in former Soviet Union places, so it might have been, the bases were probably there beforehand, and they were allowed to keep them up when the Soviet Union broke apart. Some countries might want the bases there. And I'm not saying that every single country doesn't want the base there, but I'm sure they're intimidated or scared to say no because, of course, they want the U.S. as their ally. So if the U.S. is like, hey, can we put a base in here? Of course they're going to say yes. Now, like Russia or China is not going to say, well, actually, that's not true. There's a bunch of bases, from what I understand, in China as well. But I think that was from a long time ago, and I don't know if those are still there. If I could get my damn computer to work. Let me get off of Skype because Skype takes up a lot of the CPU. And I'm kind of getting stuck on these websites here. So, but to have that many bases and that many countries, to me says right there that obviously you you got something going on there, that you are definitely an empire, or at very least a wannabe empire. But why do you need 1,000 bases or quote unquote installations around the world? Why would you think? And I never even announced the number or the Skype call in, but I believe everybody has it. But in case you don't, 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. And if you'd like to Skype in, I'm going to get back on Skype here. It's Nonpartisan Liberty for All. So just send a contact request for Nonpartisan Liberty for All. If I can get back on this fucking thing. No, not that one. So there's only one, reason that I see, and that's control. That you want to be able to, they would say, they being the government, I'm sure would say, well, national security, where, it's dangerous to be an American and we have to have a base everywhere. That's them saying it, not me saying we. Because what if somebody starts acting up? Let me just look for even another source. And of course, that would count bases in the United States too. And I don't know how many bases there are in the United States. It'd be nice to have a map. And that's only the ones that they admit to. Because I'm sure that they have bases like secret CIA. I don't know if you call those bases. They have secret CIA stash houses, or they don't call them stash houses. What's that? What's that name? Something like that. It sounds like stash, but it's not. More than 1,000 U.S. bases and/or military installations. Everywhere I'm looking, that's where it is. And the sources of information are C. Johnson, the NATO Watch Committee, the International Network for the Abolition of Foreign Military Bases revealed that the U.S. operates and/or controls between 700 and 800 military bases worldwide. So that's just between 700 and 800, but I heard closer to 1,000. Even still, 800, and that was earlier too. So at this point, I think that was 10 years ago. So in other places, I've read 1,000, and they were more recent. So I would assume that the Huffington Post claims 1,000. Ron Paul says the U.S. has military personnel in 130 nations and 900 bases around the world. So, I mean, it's pretty much somewhere from, 900 and 1,000. And that's what the Huffington Post said, around 1,000. So, and he had said 130 nations. $662 overseas bases is what they're saying there, and from PolitiFact is saying there are I think about the same, but not as many overseas. So either way you look at it, as far as I'm concerned, it could be fucking 800. That's still way too much. It is way too much as to why they have, not as to why, but as to having that many bases. So obviously, it's like a watcher. Well, we got to watch what's going on in all these countries. We got to have our troops ready here in case this happens. So that's a big reason as to why the U.S. has an empire. This is the big thing to me, that what the United States did, and they did this in all aspects, is that they didn't go out and start an empire like other countries did, 400 or 500 years ago. I think the last empire was real empire, ancient empire was maybe like 400 years ago or something. So that might have been the Ottoman Empire, actually. There might have been a couple after that. But that's not counting, military empires and the colonization with Britain and France and Spain. But obviously, that alone tells you that they have an empire. But they did it in a totally different way, as to, instead of come out and say we have an empire, because they don't want people to know that. They don't want people to think that the United States is an empire. It's done more in secret. Most of the things they do are in secret. Covert operations with the CIA, drone bombings, this and that. And all of these things that they're doing, having bases all over the world, and being a certain, I'm sure there's like a certain distance that they're at least whatever miles from every single country in the world. And again, what is that for? There is no rational reason. I mean, I'm still like, how can people sit there and you have these Republicans saying, no, we need more overseas bases. We need more military spending. So how can you sit there and ask for more military spending? What is wrong with closing bases? Seriously, what is the point? So if they shoot a missile, you can intercept it? Is it that? So essentially for the U.S., who on the other side of that did the same thing, wanted to avoid, obviously, Germany's mistakes and slowly take over, not do it real quickly, and do it in a way that people had the illusion of freedom, and they wouldn't stand up because they still had that illusion of freedom, and they feel comfortable and they don't want to do anything about it because they want to sit in their comfort and have that and not risk not having that. So there are so many things that the U.S. government did, whether this was a plan of a bunch of people, or who knows that the founding fathers didn't get together and from the beginning, maybe not all of them, but some of them, and say, this is what we're going to do over the, or these groups. Because back then they had the, what's that group that they have? I can't even think of it. I want to call them the shoemakers, but it's not. It's something that sounds like something that it's not, and I can't think of it, so that's fine. But to have the, in these secret groups, to have this planned out, not to a T, but the whole thing that, okay, we're going to eventually, take over everything, and that's the goal. And I'm not saying that that's what it is. I'm just speculating. But who the fuck knows anymore? This is definitely something that's been going on for a long time. And it's been going on before World War II and even before that, where government has taken more and more freedoms, even though they only started with a certain amount, and keep taking more and more. And the end game is controlling every aspect of your life. So part of it is also, I don't know what the plans are for the rest of the world. Is it, because now it's essentially just make sure that their own interests are supported. So you have like the CIA and their secret empire building. So all these covert operations, all the installing of leaders, which a lot has come out, all of these things, assassinations of leaders that didn't do what they wanted them to do, controlling all the countries that they want something from, all of these things that they've been doing that assist in their, or are in their best interest. I don't know if it's in their best interest as a whole for the future, but it's something that at the moment it's in their best interest because they need to, anything with oil or the petrodollar or reserve currency in order to do something to save that or whatever it might be. So they've done all these things and they just do whatever is in their best interest to do. And the U.S. itself, the biggest thing, I'm going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about this. Because never mind all that. They are an empire. They control, I don't know how many countries they control. Maybe it's all the NATO countries. Maybe it's all those and more. Well, it's got to be more than the NATO countries. They control a lot of countries. They put fear in a lot of countries. And a lot of these countries know that if the United States asks them for something, that they're to comply or else. Now, you have a certain amount of countries like Russia, China, that have nuclear weapons, and they're going to tell the U.S. to fuck off. Not only that, they're trying to, through different things, not directly, destroy the U.S. empire. And China's trying to do it with the economy and the building their own SWIFT system, their own bank with these BRICS nations. So they're saying, hey, we're sick of your fucking empire. We're sick of the U.S. and its empire and its bullshit, and we're going to fight against it. Now, the other thing I wanted to say is all of these other countries in the past and these empires, and I guess they weren't countries, basically, if you put somebody else in the U.S.'s position, they're going to do the same thing. Government is government. I don't have anything directly against the U.S. I have something against government. I've said this before, but there are some people out there that actually just want to demonize America. They want America's government to remain. They just want to turn it into a socialist, communist government. They don't want a free society. They, want rulers and all of this shit. So you have a lot of those people that even claim to be libertarians, and I don't get that, and are against cops, but still want a society that's going to be controlled. So I don't understand a lot of that. But you definitely have the U.S. as an empire, and you're starting to get backlash from these bigger nations. And they may be able to, not through war, not through fighting, but through different economic ideas and developing different things, they may be able to do that. They may be able to at least knock down the U.S. empire. Now, then somebody else might want to be, the head of Vladimir Putin might want to have his empire. Who knows? And that's probably what will happen is if the U.S. isn't the biggest empire, someone else is going to step in and take their place, just like they have for thousands of years. It's just different the way the game is played now. But really, the United States itself, from coast to coast, is an empire. So I'm going to take a break, and when I come back, we'll talk about that. So check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. Thomas Woody had to go, so he wanted to say goodbye, and he'll definitely be back, just going through a lot of issues there, but he'll definitely be back on the show. And we will be back again. I want to remind everybody, if you're around on Christmas Eve, or at least near a smartphone, turn it on and listen to our 80s and 90s. What we're going to do for Christmas Eve is talk about late 80s and 90s hip-hop, and essentially how it relates to freedom and liberty, some of it, and how I saw it and how it affected me. So I'm going to talk all about that. We'll play some clips, not a whole song, because then, the copyright thing and all that bullshit, but we'll play some short clips of various songs that actually allows us to play more. So if you're going to be around, tune into that, or you can always listen to it on Spreaker. You can always listen to the archives there. So we will be right back after this. nonpartisanlibertyforall.com.
This is Rukadowski of WeAreChange.org reporting to you here in Miami, Florida. I need to make a very important video because after studying U.S. foreign policy for the past 15 years, I believe we are finally at the breaking point of the U.S. empire. If you look at what's been happening globally, we have countries like Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Russia recently make an intelligence pact sharing information together to destroy ISIS. As we know, Russia has started bombing ISIS inside of Syria with the assistance of the Chinese government and the Chinese military. The breaking point now comes with Germany. Angela Merkel recently made a statement saying that Assad needs to be a part of the conversation. Commentators and journalists are describing this statement as groundbreaking. Approaching Assad would be an about-face in the way of the West in dealing with Syria. With Germany making a stance against U.S. foreign policy, France is most likely to make a very similar decision very soon. You look globally at these two opposing forces. We have Turkey, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar with the United States, which have directly and indirectly supported the growth of ISIS going up against Iran, Iraq, Syria, Russia, China, Germany, and soon to be France. This is an extremely dangerous situation because Israeli fighter jets that have been bombing Assad and helping ISIS are still flying in Syria, and Russia is threatening to shoot them down. Russian fighter jets have actually invaded Turkish airspace. This is causing a very extreme, dangerous situation that could break out into a world war possibility between these two major factions. Now, why are all these countries turning against U.S. foreign policy? Well, Russian airstrikes within the past 24 hours have targeted 4 command centers, a jihad training center, a workshop producing suicide belts, and 3 army depots within just 24 hours. The Russians are now saying, according to Alexis Pushkov, the head of the Russian Parliament Internal Affairs Committee, is saying the U.S.-led coalition spent a whole year pretending that they were striking ISIS targets. But what are the results of these strikes? And he's right. Within the past 13 months, the U.S. government and the military have been supposedly bombing ISIS. What has happened within those 13 months? ISIS grew to its strongest possibility that it could ever be, gaining millions of dollars from Turkey and Saudi Arabia by selling off the oil that they are stealing, and they are the most powerful that they have ever been when the United States was supposed to be bombing them. There's even bombshell reports saying that the Pentagon refused to bomb ISIS training centers, but now the Russian are, and the world leaders are asking, what the hell has been happening here? Even General Wesley Clark, former head of the NATO command, said that ISIS was started through the funding from our friends and our allies, and he is 100% right. Reuters even reported how Syrian-trained rebels that the U.S. government gave intelligence to, weapons and arms to, gave those weapons and arms and intelligence and trucks to al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda front fighting in Syria against Assad. The United States in this situation is saying that Russia is horrible. They're inflicting civilian casualties. And then the next day, the U.S. coalition bombs a hospital in Afghanistan. A Doctors Without Borders hospital, killing doctors, killing children, killing innocent men and women who are there for treatment. And now the Russians are saying, look at the two strategies here. Russia is destroying ISIL training camps that the U.S. refused, while the U.S. is bombing a hospital in Afghanistan. And the world leaders are going against the United States because of these very important geopolitical moves. Now, with the bombing of the hospital, of course, there was major media reports saying that it was the Taliban that did this bombing. U.S. reports were so vague, no one could even figure out who bombed this hospital, and people were making the assertion that it was the Taliban. Then the U.S. coalition responded saying that the hospital was a Taliban base. Doctors Without Borders had to respond saying no, that wasn't the case in any way, shape, or form. CNN and the New York Times are obscuring who actually caused this massacre in Afghanistan, with these insane forces just trying to lie to us every single day, financing, funding, training ISIS, pretending to bomb them. The world is turning against the United States. Now, what's going to happen because of this? I don't know. But at least you know what's happening now, because the mainstream media won't tell you in any way, shape, or form that the U.S. even committed a horrible crime. For 2 years, around 2 years now, on this YouTube channel, we've been telling you the U.S. is training ISIS. The U.S. major goal when it comes to Syria is to get rid of Assad, because Assad is the one who broke down and disagreed with the pipelines from Saudi Arabia that was going to go through Turkey and bypass Russia and have Europe dependent on Saudi Arabian oil. The geopolitics of this whole region is totally screwed up. And now we're stuck in this quagmire with these two major forces facing off against each other. Where this is going to lead, I have no idea. But hell, at least you know what's happening now. If you're interested in doing this and making this your job, reporting the truth to the people, check out Change Media University. It's free for high school students. We teach you on an online college course how to be an independent journalist, how
Partisan liberty for all, and we are back. Sorry about that. Something in my lungs or something. I thought that song I had actually cut up, and I just took the beginning to it, but I guess that was not the case, as I only play instrumentals, or I need to get my voice person to do some more stuff, but she hasn't done anything in a while. Anyway, we were talking about the United States government and its empire and why it's an empire. I think we pretty much established that when I talked about it a few weeks ago. But for people who weren't listening, you know, all the military bases, all the things that they've done, all the covert ops, installing governments, putting bases there and through probably coercion and intimidation, doing essentially whatever they want to get what they want. The only countries that will really stand up to them are ones that have nuclear weapons, like Russia and China, and that are more powerful countries. Not that England, I would say England, I guess, is a powerful country, but they're allies. I don't know that there's a U.S. base in England, because you notice there's no fucking U.S. base, foreign bases here. Right. So why does the U.S. think it's okay for them to do all of these things that they do? And there's a lot of them. But if anybody else does it, they freak out. If China moves a ship somewhere, it's, oh my God, they moved a ship. But if the U.S. tries to build a base in the Ukraine and gets all cozy with them, right on the border of Russia, you expect Russia to just be like, oh, yeah, that's fine. Now, I'm not saying I'm a fan of Russia neither, because, again, it's a government. And governments are there to control the people and to essentially, as I've said before, control as much as they can. And that's really why I believe they're there, regardless of what they say. And ultimately, if they say to keep people safe, well, that's controlling the people. Because if you're trying to keep people safe, you're trying to control people so they won't do things to make other people unsafe. So call it whatever you want to call it. The bottom line is that this is really getting out of fucking hand. I'm kind of going off topic a little, but this whole big empire they've, I don't know what their plan is for all these other countries, but they've built this empire outside the United States. Now it's time for them to build in the United States. However, the United States itself is already an empire. So let's talk about that first and then get into how or what they're going to do possibly to build up, well, what they've already done actually, but continue to do to build up their empire of their own within their own country. But first of all, besides the 13 colonies, every state was taken in the same way that all of these empires, these ancient empires, took land. Because it was all occupied land. All of it. So maybe some of it was, like the places that really there's nobody there now, neither. The less populated states, like the desert of Nevada. I don't know that there was a lot of people there. But it's the same thing. The United States itself is an empire that has existed for over 200 years now. But, well, actually not true, because as they took, as they move forward, they want to call it manifest destiny and just say, hey, it was our destiny to move across the country. It was in our best interest. And we needed to go from one coast to the other coast. Okay, fine. But don't deny that what was done was the creation of an empire. Never mind what they did to all the other countries. That's icing on the cake with a cherry. More than one cherry. There's a bunch of cherries. There's strawberries on that motherfucker. But the United States itself is an empire. You had 13 colonies. I'll even waive that part of it and say, okay, that wasn't an empire, which it pretty much was, but we'll say it wasn't. We'll say the United States had basically the whole East Coast except Florida. Right, essentially. In Pennsylvania. I don't think they touched the water. But, so, we'll say that was the United States. It was 6 million people. Then, they say, you know what? We have a country now. We have a federal government. Now, we're going to take over all of this land and start an empire. Now, of course, you could say, well, from Louisiana to, I don't know, like Nebraska or something, the Louisiana Purchase, which was $3 million, which there's got to be more to that than the reality, because why would the French just be like, here you go, $3 million. And I know back then $3 million was a lot more than it is now, but it really wasn't a lot of money for that amount of land. And on top of that was, who the fuck were the French to sell it? They said, hey, we own this. Basically, what the French said was, you give us $3 million, we're not going to fuck with you doing whatever you want with this land. Because what are the French going to do? They're going to go to war? They could, but I don't think they wanted to bother. They were just like, look, I don't know that. I'm just speculating. But I would think they were just like, look, now we can get some money out of this, and we don't want to deal with this shit because there's Native Americans there, and we're not going to, go after all this land. So buying it from the French was not really getting it themselves. It was like buying the deed on a house that belongs to somebody else. So they took over all that land. But they didn't stop there. They kept going, went all the way to the other side of the coast, all the way to California. And everything below that to Arizona, Texas. And then they supposedly bought Florida from Spain. I don't know enough about what was going on there to say whether Spain really had control over Florida or not. But that's supposedly what happened. So is that not an empire? Is that not the taking of an empire? Now they stopped. I guess they could have said, hey, we're going to go. Well, they did go for like half of Mexico that they took. They could have gone further, I guess, and tried to take the whole fucking thing, take Canada, take all of Mexico, and go all the way down. But they at least stopped where they stopped. But no matter how you look at it, the land that we are on right now, unless I guess you live in one of those 13 colonies, but even if you do, is the same thing as what the Ottoman Empire did, what the Roman Empire did, what they all did. And that's just to establish the country as it is today. And then they took Alaska and Hawaii. And then they took territories like Puerto Rico and Guam and the Virgin Islands. And you can't leave. A state can't leave. Look what happened when a bunch of states tried to leave. Now, today, if people got enough signatures, would the federal government put it to a vote? I don't think they would, and I'll tell you why. Because once you got one, you're going to have a whole bunch more to follow. So I would think that definitely not, that there's no way that they would allow it to happen. Now, they may do it in a way that they fix the vote. So they might say, and I don't know what addresses that, if anything. I know state constitutions actually, I think, address that. But if New Hampshire, who I know they talk about secession there, Texas, and they had some plan in California, but it wasn't secession. It was like breaking it up into like a bunch of states. But I think that if they allowed a vote to take place, that they'd make sure that it went the other way no matter what. Because if it doesn't, then they have to deal with all these other states popping up. And I think half the country may want to leave the federal government definitely the whole South would want to leave the federal government. So for that reason, I don't think it would happen. Especially with what's going on now, where you have people, fucking progressives, that they're not happy enough with the laws being passed in their states and even in their region. They want your state to adopt these laws too, especially with guns. So the motherfuckers in New York are not happy enough with having strict gun laws in New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts. They want strict gun laws in Nevada too. And I'm like, well, what the fuck does that have to do with you? Just don't come to Nevada then. It's like 3,000 miles away. Why do you need to come here? If you have an issue with the fact that we, for the most part, don't have any gun restrictions other than the federal and the, concealed carry permit thing. But no, that's not good enough. So I guess back to the whole empire thing. The U.S., where we're sitting now, is the United States empire. And I can just hear like Mark Levin's annoying voice, and I'm not a fan of his, but as I have said, that I have heard him, he's on when I'm driving home, so occasionally I got some good CDs from the library, so I haven't been listening, and I think he's on vacation, but I can hear him, with his argument as to why that's not true. But they agreed to it. They signed in as a state. They wanted to be a state. Well, after a couple hundred years, or if you're a part of something and it's based on the current law, and then your government or your law totally changes, shouldn't you have the right to change your mind and get out? Now, I don't really care about secession either way. I think it's a good thing in that you take away a layer of government, but now you just got a new bunch of people to oppress you. Well, not new. They've been oppressing you as well, but you got rid of one layer of oppression, but now you just gave more power to the other layer of oppression. Because no matter what, it's not going to solve a lot. It's going to take out that layer. So again, you could say it's positive in that sense that, well, we don't have to worry about the federal government now. But what is the state going to do now that they they have all the power? And don't think that any of that will go to their head or anything, right? Because it will. So it's, do you want to be oppressed by the federal government or the state? Well, right now, I guess you're oppressed by both. But the federal government doesn't have certain powers. Or the state government doesn't have certain powers that the federal government does. Regarding, again, this, and I can't stress this enough, the demonization of America, and I know people are going to say, well, you're just demonizing the U.S., and that's what you do, and I guess I've been called everything because depending on the issue, you could say, well, you're a liberal, or you're a conservative, or you're this, and people love labels. They just love them. No, I believe in true freedom and liberty, and I don't believe in empires that are extorting my money and then using it to build their empire. But at the same time, as I was saying, you do have people that demonize America, but then put up other countries or prop up other countries. And I talked about this when you had the Palestine-Israel conflict going on. I guess it's a everlasting conflict, but when it was getting real bad and people were protesting, holding up, Palestine signs, and they really took the side of Palestine, which is a government that is fucked up as well. So, and these are people, again, that, well, I thought were libertarians, which, again, I don't even know what that word means anymore, and that's why I stay away from labels. But these people are not for freedom. They're, in my opinion, they're not. If they're going to celebrate this other government, and which is a fucked up government, it's just run by Hamas. So caring about the people is one thing, and I think that's done too much where people just forget about or don't care about people dying in other countries. Like, oh, it's another country, so who gives a fuck? You don't care about kids getting bombed in the middle of the night or whatever, which is fucked up. Now, at the same time, there's so much going on in the U.S. There's only so much that, I can speak out about. And I do speak out a lot about the U.S. government bombing other countries and murdering kids and stuff like that. But as far as doing something directly about their country, what I guess comes first is where I live at. That doesn't mean I don't think it's wrong what's going on in other countries and that I don't disagree with what's going on here, because I don't. But at the same time, it's hard enough to focus on all the things that are going on here. And it gets stressful and it gets frustrating. And it's like you want to do so much, you want to change so much, and really there's not a lot you can do, period. I still promote the non-compliance, and people like Thomas are out there doing it. And he's out there alone, basically, because nobody else is doing it where he's at. And that's the one thing that obviously I worry about. I know, and I definitely know here in Las Vegas, that it's just me. So if I want to not comply, I'm going to get kidnapped, or I'm going to defend myself from getting kidnapped. Hypothetically. Those would be the two things that could happen. Or I could get killed. But that would be in the process of one of those things happening. So, I've thought before in the back of my head, but I don't think this would ever work. Because they're just, I feel like they're just gone. But even the police that are former police that are part of I can't remember the name of the organization, but it's like Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I was trying to think of what it was because it's an acronym. That would be LAP, though. I don't think that's what it's called. But even with them, they still say a lot, well, this still needs to happen, and and it's with a lot of stuff where they still say, well, we still need to do this and we still need to do that. And what I was thinking is even having a conversation with a police officer, I think would be pointless, because I think they would just be evaluating what I say, whether I'm a threat or not, and trying to get whatever information they can about me. And really, it's not hard. You can just listen to the show, and there you go. But I just don't see how, all the information I had put together when I went to those county commission meetings years ago when they were trying to raise the sales tax, and all the facts about the police. And even what I say now, my rationale as to why I think all police are bad. And I think I have valid points. And I think a rational person, even if you're a police officer, would say, okay, you're right, you have valid points, but we believe this or we believe that. But still, my main point being that anybody who arrests someone for something like drugs is kidnapping them, which is grabbing them off the street, which is physically assaulting them at the same time, and that the police are the ones committing the crime in that scenario. So any cop who arrests somebody for drugs is a criminal, in my opinion. Now, to get a cop to actually believe that, I don't think it's possible. I know you have former cops that may believe that, but even with them, because I've talked to former cops, not many, but I still get that same thing, and I can't explain it, but it's just, there's just such a gap there, even with people that agree, between believing in freedom and believing in self-ownership and those concepts. And those are the things that they just don't get. And I don't think they ever will get them. And that's, of course, a serious problem. Because one thing kind of leads to another, something like self-ownership. And I don't know how you can't believe that. I guess if you're religious, you could say, well, God owns you. And I can understand that rationale. I don't agree with it, but I guess I can understand, well, God owns you. But how you know what is good and bad based on God, and you can actually believe in a Bible bit written by man, I don't understand that. But at least you have some kind of rational basis as to how you arrive at what you arrive at. If your rationale is that the government owns you based on what? Because you're born within a certain geographical location, how is that any type of rationale that means anything or makes any sense? Because that's what you would be saying, that because you're born in a specific geographical location, that the government owns you, if you're saying that you don't own yourself. And if you're saying you own yourself, then you can't deny the fact that you have the right to put whatever you want in your body, and that the government is violating your rights when they kidnap you for attempting to do it. Not even attempting to do it, but possessing it. So yeah, I don't think that will ever happen. I know they have the lunch with a cop or something, or it's just most of them are just, it's like they're wired differently. I don't know. Anyway, that's all we have for tonight. I will be back tomorrow. Shire Dude's going to join us. I should play the Shire Dude thing. I have it somewhere. I can't find it right now, but he'll be with us tomorrow to discuss population control. And that will take us in a whole bunch of different places. Some places where I think most people don't want to go, but there are some facts on them. So we'll see where that takes us. And then, of course, as I mentioned, on Thursday night, Christmas Eve, I will be talking all about ShireDude.com. Not ShireDude.com, but I will be talking all about late 80s and 90s rap and how I think it relates to freedom and liberty, and also how it affected me as well. And I guess it will get, I'll get as personal as I probably have. I don't want to get too personal, but I'll get a certain amount of personal, I guess, just for you, the audience. So be sure to tune in on Thursday as well. But we'll be back tomorrow, 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. And again, Thursday, Christmas Eve, 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. Thanks, everybody. NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com, Spreaker.com.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer, the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
You know, I'll still listen to the rappers that I know from, you know, that I liked back then, but not a lot of rappers were saying a lot in the, you know, past few years, or past, probably more than that. So I'll get some stuff. I'll definitely get rappers that I still like from years ago. But to be there, really, to see what went on in the late 80s, early 90s with the parental stickers and Al Gore's wife going after people, and to get the sticker on there. You had in the mid 90s, you had Reverend Calvin Butts and Dolores Tucker, and they took out a steamroller and rolled over a bunch of tapes, and you had shit like that going on. So it's just some crazy stuff going on back then. 2 Live Crew getting arrested. So NWA as well for saying fuck the police. And I think the release of the movie has brought some of that back, and probably brought an interest back by today's generation. I mean, don't forget that Straight Outta Compton, the album, came out in 1988. So I think I bought it in late 89, because you wouldn't hear about this stuff. Like when I was young, I wouldn't hear about NWA, or the only thing there was Yo MTV Raps. So once I knew that existed, I started watching that. But before that, it was like I didn't know what the fuck was out there. I knew Run DMC, and that was the first tape I got. So I don't want to go into the show that I'm going to do on Thursday, because that's really what it's going to be about. And what I'm going to do is, because I know there's some 30-second rule or something like that. So I'm not going to play whole songs, but I'll play a bunch of clips, play like 20 seconds or 25 seconds of a song, so you can hear that as well and explain my state of mind and how it related to me and how it even helped, I think, in my journey through liberty, because it did. It was back then it was fuck you. You can't tell me what to do. You can't push your values on me. You can't make me do these stupid things. And you could hear it in a lot of the music, even though you can look at some stuff and say, well, you know, this is about this or that or whatever. And they talk about killing people or this or that. But a lot of it was frustration of what was going on at the time. And unless you are around at that time, I don't know that you can understand it. I mean, going back and not knowing anything about it and then listening to it, I don't know I don't know what that does. Just like I don't know that I could listen to
We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get the paperwork, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. I'm your host, Dave Bourne, and I'm coming to you live from Las Vegas on this Tuesday, December 22nd, 2015. Yeah, 2005. That was a while ago. I'm sure some of you in 2005 were like still in high school or something. I don't know. Anyway, 2015. So thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. And you can listen on Spreaker.com and nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. We promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom, as well as exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. Like all governments, it's based on power, control, and ruling over others, and achieves this through violence and force. So, before I get to my main topic, and I have a lot to talk about this week. This evening, I'm totally thrown off because somebody just sent me a message. Anytime somebody sends me a message, it just totally fucking throws me off. As I told people before, I'm very good at multitasking, except when it comes to talking on the mic. It just totally fucks me up. So what I'm kind of doing is giving people, which there's a lot of them, I guess, now out there that want to fuck me up and want to fuck my show up and stuff like that, an excuse or something they can do to fuck me up. So I got to keep my Facebook closed, I guess, during the show. But anyway, I have a couple things I want to talk about before I get to the main topic on music in the 60s or something, and people that are talking about whatever that's going on that they're standing up for, that I can relate to that. If they were, I don't even know that they were, but I guess they were. But I can listen to NWA and Public Enemy and Ghetto Boys and groups like that if you take it at face value, it sounds just nuts. But I can listen to that and then see, understand what was going on there and what it really meant. So, that's what I'm going to talk about. And I have a lot to say, and I guess it will give them insight more into me as well. Not that people want an insight into me or anything, but it's just, I think it will be fun to talk about music and to play a little music on Christmas Eve, since I'm going to be on. So if you like hip hop or even are interested in hearing about what was going on at the time, which I consider myself pretty much an expert, I guess, or a semi-expert, just because I listened to all the music and I saw what was going on. Now, I saw, what I saw was limited. I was a kid. I grew up, at the time I was in Boston, so it might be different than other people's experiences, but I definitely know a lot about the music during that time period. So if it's something you like to hear about, I'm sure it will be interesting. Tune in Thursday, 7 p.m., Christmas Eve, till 10. And then, of course, you can always listen to the archive if you can't tune in live. But I think it will be a lot of fun. So I considered New Year's, but then I'm like, well, I don't know. I got to talk to my fiance first, and I don't know that people will be tuning in on New Year's. So Christmas Eve maybe might be something to listen to, but New Year's probably not. And she'll probably want to do something as well. So I'm leaving that open until I talk to her about doing the show. So, but even talking about it, I'm actually kind of getting excited about doing the show. I think it will be a pretty interesting show. But for tonight, we also have an interesting show. So before, there's a lot of knowledge in this that is, I did find it interesting. And I'm not going to go into all the details because honestly, I don't know all the details of the history of all these empires. I have enough knowledge to talk about them intelligently, but that's about it. I'm not an expert, and that's not what the show is really about. But I wanted to bring up all these other empires in comparison. It's really about, because you're obviously the U.S. empire and when it will fall, or if you want to, I guess, I forgot what I called it on my event here, so I want to look at that beforehand. Oh, I should have looked at it beforehand, but pretty much it's about all empires and that they eventually fall. And when will the U.S. empire fall is essentially what we're going to talk about tonight. But before I get to that, there's a couple stories I wanted to talk about. And also, I just posted a new event for Thursday. I changed Thursday's show because our new co-host won't be able to make it. And I wanted to do a show like this for a while. And I thought since Thursday is Christmas Eve, it might be an appropriate time to do it. So what I'm going to do on Thursday is talk all about late 80s and early 90s rap and hip hop and how that affected or relates to freedom and liberty. Because I know there's going to be a lot of people that says, oh, no, it don't, because a lot of it was socialist. And that actually is true. However, I never took it that way. Not, when I was a kid, I wasn't really looking at that part of it or even thinking about that part of it. The same with, say, the Black Panthers. I didn't really look at the socialist part. I looked at the police are harassing people, and then they're coming by, they being the Black Panthers, are coming by with guns and saying, what's going on here? So it's not that I blacked it out. It's just I focused on different things. I focused on fighting against the system, but that's really what it used to be. Even though and I'm trying to text at the same time. Even though now I think a lot of rap is just kind of stupid. Not that I don't still like a lot of the beats, and there's still rappers that have been around for a while. And, they still come out with albums. Like recently, I just got the Scarface album from the library. I don't know if anybody who Scarface is. You might know Ghetto Boys. He's from the group Ghetto Boys, so a lot of people know them. So he came out with a new album that I just got. It's pretty good, and he's got to be in his 40s now, and going to see all the differences between, okay, how is America an empire like all these were empires? And people can look at the U.S. and say, no, it's not an empire because this is what an empire is. If I talk about the Ottoman Empire or the Roman Empire, I mean, most people are familiar with, I think the biggest one's got to be the Roman Empire. I think everybody knows Julius Caesar. There was a play about him, and that's the one that I think everyone would know the most about. But the Ottoman Empire, the Persian Empire, the Mongols, I think a lot of people know because of Genghis Khan. So I'm not going to talk about every single empire there was. It'd take me all night, nor am I going to go into that much detail. But I do want to bring up some points about these different empires. A lot of them were pretty similar. There were little differences in some, supposedly. And I say supposedly because this is knowledge that gets passed down. It's hard, I think, I guess it depends on the empire. Because if you're talking about the Ottoman Empire, you're talking about, I think, maybe 400 years ago. If you're talking about like the Roman Empire, you're talking about way before that. So, the Persian Empire, you're talking BC. So, meaning before Christ. And I hate that we go by the Catholic calendar. Although if we went by, I don't know what year it would be, like how we would do that. Like start with the year of the first human or what? But they do that fucking backwards thing where, okay, year 0 is the year Jesus was born, and then every year after that is just another year. So anyway, what I wanted to talk about first, had a cough there, is what's going on with these fucking school closings. And I saw a caption, and now I don't know that I should talk about this because this doesn't relate to it, though. In Nashua, New Hampshire, they closed the schools down due to a threat. So it doesn't relate to what happened in L.A., but then I saw something about somebody being arrested in L.A. and something about a school, but it showed one of those clips that's muted. So I don't know if that was when they closed all the schools or what. And even if it was, they'd still arrest somebody for making a prank call. So they might have arrested the person. And then they can say, well, this person had all these weapons, so they were probably going to do it even though they weren't. And to me, if you don't do something, especially something like that, where 3 days later or a week later they arrest you, I'm pretty sure they weren't going to do it then. So they want to trot people out.